November 4, 1922. Valley of the Kings, West Bank of the Nile, Egypt. Before sunrise, the desert was silent except for the scrape of metal against stone. A thin layer of dust drifted through the cold morning air. A young Egyptian water boy climbed the slope carrying clay jars for the excavation workers. Around him, the Valley of the Kings looked exhausted, stripped bare after decades of digging. Archaeologists believed there was nothing left to find here. Every major royal tomb had supposedly already been discovered, looted, catalogued, or destroyed centuries earlier. And yet one man refused to leave. British archaeologist Howard Carter stood near the excavation trench beneath the harsh limestone cliffs. He was tired. Financial support from his patron, Lord Carnarvon, was nearly gone. Years of searching had produced only broken pottery and fragments left by earlier excavators. This season would likely be his last. Then the boy's foot struck something hard beneath the sand. Not natural rock, not loose rubble, a carved stone edge. Workers immediately dropped to their knees and began brushing away the desert earth. Slowly, a stairway emerged. One step, then another, descending directly into the bedrock beneath the valley floor. Carter froze. The entrance was hidden beneath ancient worker huts, structures dating back over 3,000 years. Earlier excavators had unknowingly built over it. The tomb below had remained invisible for centuries, possibly untouched. As the final rays of sunlight vanished behind the cliffs, Carter examined the staircase more closely. The lower doorway was sealed with plaster bearing faint impressions of royal necropolis stamps, jackal figures, bound captives, royal seals. But there was something strange. The seals appeared broken and then repaired. Someone had entered the tomb long ago, and someone else had sealed it again. That single contradiction changed everything. Looted tombs were common in ancient Egypt. Nearly every royal burial in the Valley of the Kings had been robbed in antiquity. Gold melted down, coffins destroyed, bodies desecrated. Yet this entrance looked unusually intact despite evidence of intrusion. Why reseal a robbed tomb? What remained inside? Carter sent an urgent telegram to Lord Carnarvon in England. At last have made wonderful discovery in Valley. Weeks later, Carnarvon arrived in Egypt with his daughter, Lady Evelyn Herbert. Together they descended the narrow staircase illuminated only by flickering lamps. The deeper they moved underground, the colder the air became. Dust coated the walls untouched for millennia. Then came the second sealed doorway. Carter carefully inserted a metal chisel through a tiny opening near the upper corner. Ancient air escaped from the darkness inside, air trapped since the Bronze Age. He later said the candle flame trembled. Not from wind, from pressure. Carnarvon waited behind him impatiently in the suffocating silence. Before asking the question history would remember forever. Can you see anything? Carter stared into the black chamber beyond the wall. At first, only shapes emerged from the darkness. Strange silhouettes, animal forms, gold surfaces catching candlelight like fire beneath the earth. The deeper the excavation moved into Tutankhamun's tomb, the more it felt less like a celebration of royal power. It felt more like the aftermath of a crisis. Weeks after the discovery, Howard Carter and his team finally prepared to enter the sealed burial chamber. The process was agonizingly slow. Every object had to be photographed, mapped, and catalogued. Brushes, wooden supports, linen wrappings, primitive conservation techniques for objects untouched for 3,000 years. And everywhere they looked, there was gold. Not decorative gold, overwhelming gold. Golden shrines nested inside larger shrines like layers of a sacred puzzle. Ritual daggers, thrones, amulets, sandals, jewelry beside ceremonial objects whose meanings had been forgotten. You could feel the suffocating density of wealth packed into cramped underground rooms designed for eternity. Then the team reached the massive gilded shrines protecting the king's sarcophagus. The structures filled nearly the entire chamber. Workers dismantled them piece by piece. Temperatures climbed under electric lamps. The air became thick with dust and ancient resin. Behind the shrines waited a quartzite sarcophagus. Inside it rested 3 nested coffins. The innermost coffin stunned everyone in the chamber. Solid gold, more than 100 kilograms of it, shaped into the youthful face of the pharaoh. Calm eyes, crossed arms, royal crook and flail held against the chest. For a moment, the room fell silent. Because this was no longer just archaeology. It was confrontation, a face staring back across 30 centuries. Yet even at the height of discovery, strange inconsistencies kept appearing. The burial chamber was surprisingly small for a king of Egypt's new kingdom. Compared to the grand tombs of Seti I or Ramesses II, Tutankhamun's tomb felt modest, constricted, improvised. The walls revealed something unusual. Scenes normally painted with precision appeared rushed. Some figures showed awkward proportions. Certain inscriptions contained corrections. Areas of plaster looked hastily completed before burial. It was as though the funeral had happened under extreme urgency. Then came the mummy. When the team attempted to remove the golden funerary mask, they encountered a horrifying problem. The body had become fused to the coffin. Ancient embalmers had poured enormous quantities of black resin oils over the mummy during burial. Over thousands of years, the substances hardened like cement beneath Egypt's desert heat. To separate the body, excavators resorted to methods that shocked later generations. Limbs were detached. Pieces of the mummy were cut free. The young king's remains suffered severe damage during extraction. When the body was finally examined, a haunting image emerged. Tutankhamun was not the powerful ruler many expected. He was fragile, thin, physically vulnerable. His left foot showed deformities consistent with clubfoot or severe bone disease. Walking sticks discovered throughout the tomb suddenly took on new meaning. More than 100 canes had been buried beside him, not symbols of authority, but possible medical necessities. The Golden King may have struggled simply to walk. Then researchers uncovered another disturbing truth. Tutankhamun's family line was deeply intertwined through royal incest. Modern DNA studies suggested his parents were likely brother and sister, part of a dynastic practice intended to preserve divine bloodlines. But generations of inbreeding may have weakened the young pharaoh physically before he ever took the throne. You begin to understand the contradiction emerging from the burial. Everything surrounding Tutankhamun projected divine perfection, but the human inside the coffin appears increasingly fragile and tragic. By the late 1920s, the tomb of Tutankhamun had become more than an archaeological discovery. It had become a global obsession. Newspapers across Europe and America flooded readers with dramatic headlines about buried gold, sealed chambers, and ancient curses. Museums competed for artifacts while wealthy travelers poured into Cairo. For many people, Tutankhamun was no longer simply a historical figure. He was becoming myth. And myths are dangerous things, especially when death begins following the story. In April 1923, only months after entering the tomb, George Herbert, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, died suddenly in Cairo. An infected mosquito bite triggered severe blood poisoning and pneumonia. The timing terrified the public. Rumors spread almost instantly that an ancient curse had claimed its first victim. Some newspapers claimed all lights in Cairo mysteriously went out the moment Carnarvon died. Others described his dog in England collapsing at the exact same hour. Stories multiplied faster than facts. Journalists invented ominous inscriptions warning that death shall come on swift wings. But no such curse inscription actually existed in Tutankhamun's tomb. That detail was fiction, yet the fear refused to disappear, because more deaths followed. An American financier connected to the excavation died unexpectedly. A radiologist who examined the mummy later passed away. Several individuals associated with the tomb experienced illness, accidents, or early deaths. To the public, the pattern felt impossible to ignore. But inside the scientific community, skepticism grew. Many researchers pointed out that dozens of people worked on the excavation, and most lived long lives. Howard Carter himself survived for more than 15 years after opening the tomb. Still, something about the atmosphere inside the burial chambers continued unsettling visitors. The air felt strange, heavy, ancient. Modern scholars later proposed possible scientific explanations for the curse. Sealed tombs can contain dangerous molds, bacteria, and fungal spores dormant for centuries. Certain microorganisms may produce toxins affecting respiratory systems. It was a rational theory, but it didn't fully explain why the curse story endured. Perhaps because people sensed something deeper hidden beneath it. Not supernatural vengeance, but the terrifying realization that modern humanity had interrupted a world designed for eternity. The excavation itself sometimes bordered on destruction. To retrieve objects quickly, Carter's team occasionally used methods considered shocking by modern archaeological standards. Objects were separated forcibly. Adhesives damaged fragile surfaces. The mummy itself was disassembled. The irony was impossible to ignore. The tomb survived grave robbers, floods, earthquakes, and 3,000 years of history, only to suffer damage from the people trying to save it. Then another mystery emerged. The golden funerary mask, one of the most recognizable artifacts in human history, may not originally have been made for Tutankhamun. Researchers studying the mask noticed subtle irregularities in the royal names engraved upon it. Certain hieroglyphs appeared altered. Pierced ears on the mask were unusual for male pharaoh representations, more common in depictions of women and younger royals. The mask may originally have belonged to someone else, possibly Nefertiti herself. If true, Tutankhamun's burial had been assembled rapidly using recycled funerary equipment. And that possibility opened an even larger question. Where was Nefertiti? Today, more than a century after Howard Carter first looked beneath the sands of Egypt, the tomb of Tutankhamun still refuses to surrender all its secrets. That may be the most astonishing part of the story. Not the gold. Not the curse. Not even the preserved treasures. But that modern archaeology still cannot explain why this tomb exists in this form. You descend into the corridors beneath the Valley of the Kings, and immediately you feel how small the burial really is. The narrow passages seem modest compared to the grand ambitions of imperial pharaohs. The painted walls close tightly around you. The chambers feel compressed, improvised, unfinished. Nothing about it resembles the eternal monument expected for a divine ruler. And yet inside those confined rooms lay over 5,000 objects. A civilization poured into darkness. Golden beds shaped like sacred animals. Ceremonial boats prepared for journeys into the afterlife. Archery equipment, food offerings, jewelry, wine jars still bearing traces of ancient seals. Clothing folded by hands that vanished 30 centuries ago. An entire royal universe prepared for eternity. But the contradictions remain impossible to ignore. The tomb was too small. The burial was rushed. The artifacts were inconsistent. The king died unexpectedly young. Some Egyptologists believe Tutankhamun was never intended for this tomb. The theory is unsettlingly plausible. Officials may have adapted a tomb originally designed for another royal figure. Funerary equipment could have been repurposed rapidly. Ancient Egypt depended on order, what they called ma'at, stability, cosmic balance. A pharaoh's death without proper burial threatened the spiritual structure of the kingdom. There may not have been time for perfection, only survival. Beneath the spectacle of treasure lies something far more human. Panic. A royal court scrambling to bury a dead teenager. Then there is the shadow of Akhenaten. His religious revolution shattered centuries of Egyptian tradition. Temples were abandoned. Priests lost authority. Old gods disappeared beneath the radical new erased.And disk. After his death, later rulers attempted to erase his legacy completely. Names were chiseled from monuments. statues destroyed, Tutankhamun emerged directly from that chaos. Originally named Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, the boy king restored allegiance to the god Ammonius and traditional religion. But historians still debate how much choice he truly possessed. The famous golden mask presents an immortal divine ruler. Yet the body beneath belonged to a physically fragile teenager. In recent years, radar scans reignited fascination with hidden chambers, possibly connected to Queen Nefertiti. Had ancient thieves descended a few more steps beneath the desert floor, the name Tutankhamun might have vanished forever.